Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're talking about the Timberwolves' shot profile defensively and why it's so impressive. Really, the reason behind the Timberwolves' number one defense and also combating some of the talk of, oh, there's a lot of good luck with how opponents are shooting. I'll tell you why that's maybe the case, but how the Wolves are kind of creating their own luck on the defensive end of the floor. We'll also preview Wolves Thunder. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Wolves Thunder tonight. We'll talk about that a little bit later. A rematch from a fantastic game just a few weeks ago, actually the game that Anthony Edwards initially got injured in. So we'll talk a little bit about that game towards the end. I want to spend most of today, though, talking about why the Wolves defense has been so impressive this year, or really the reason behind how they're generating all this quote-unquote good luck when it comes to opponent shot attempts. So we'll get to that here. That's what we'll spend most of today on. A big thank you here, though, off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow along on X at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so the Timberwolves, of course, through play on Christmas Day, have the league's best defense still. Pretty easily the league's best defense. They have a defensive rating of 107.7. I guess it depends on where you look, but that's at Basketball Reference. They continue to have the league's best defensive effective field goal percentage. Opponents don't shoot threes well against them. No, they don't shoot open shots against them either. And there's been a lot of I want to be clear, overall, the national discourse surrounding the Wolves has been, it has to be positive, right? They're 22-6, best record in the West. They've been going back and forth with the Celtics, kind of keeping pace with the best record in the league. But there's always kind of this but related to their schedule and related to opponent shooting percentages, or you could call it defensive shooting luck, based on how opponents are shooting certain shots against them, right? Now, I'm a big fan of some of these caveats in general when it comes to saying, oh, this team's awesome. Like, you have to look at the peripherals, right? I do that all the time on this podcast. Like, what are we looking at in terms of predicting future performance? Where's the flukiness here? So I'll be the first to tell you there are a lot of times is flukiness when it comes to, certain things, like how's an opponent shooting threes against you. At some point that's going to even out, right? Well, the point I made maybe a month ago when I kind of covered this topic was like, hey, well, somebody has to have the league's best defensive field goal percentage or defensive effective field goal percentage against, or 3-point percentage against, right? Like, somebody's got to rank best in the league. And when I did this again about a month ago, I pulled kind of historicals, like what was the best defense the last 3 or 4 years in terms of effective field goal percentage? What was the best defense 3-point percentage? And are the Wolves in line? And the answer was basically yes. At the time, we were only a fifth of the way through the season, but it felt like they were pretty in line. That's still the case. I don't want to focus on that today because, again, we did it a few weeks ago, and maybe we'll get back to it mid-season. But I want to look at this from the lens of, or I guess through the lens of, if I'm going to use the that phrase correctly, the type of shots that opponents are getting, what the Wolves are trying to force opponents to do, and then also what is their success in those places on the floor, really. So just kind of taking this a layer deeper to see, like, hey, is this all very intentional, what the Wolves are doing? And if so, how sustainable is it? The other thing that I'll point out, and we talked about this maybe last week, was how good the Wolves have been against top 10 offenses and top 10 defenses this year. I think this was maybe last Wednesday or Thursday I talked about this. And the Wolves, to this point, are 6-1 against teams with a top 10 offense. Their only loss coming against the Sixers and Embiid last week. Because the Kings, like right now, they aren't a top 10 offense. And now they're 1-1 against the Kings anyway. But they were last year, right? The Kings had the league's best offense last year. So if you look at this year's top 10 offenses, the Wolves are 6-1 against top 10 offenses. They're also, I think they're undefeated against top 10 defenses too, if I'm not mistaken. I would need to pull that again, but they're faring really well against both, right? So that kind of combats some of the concern about like the strength of schedule, because that's another thing. Like early in the year, the Wolves had a really tough schedule, and there was no denying that. It had been much softer of late. And so that was another thing you're starting to see, like, but their schedule. Well, yeah, I mean, now it's back to a really tough schedule. You look at the last week and a half, the Wolves are, depending on where you look and depending on which metric you're looking at, they have a top 5 difficulty strength of schedule to this point in terms of games that they played. Like, the simple rating system over at Basketball Reference has them 4th in terms of how difficult their schedule's been. So it hasn't been a cakewalk. So if anyone tells you, yeah, but their schedule, that's not true either. Now, we know the Wolves are in the middle of this gauntlet of like 16 games against likely playoff teams, and they're, I think, 5-2 so far, if I'm not mistaken on that. So all that to say, let's focus in on the shot profile and how that has lifted the Wolves' overall defense. Number one, and the stat over at Cleaning the Glass is location effective field goal percentage. So the definition, according to Cleaning the Glass, is if this team allowed the league average field goal percentage from each location, what would their opponent's effective field goal percentage be? This gives a sense of the efficiency of a team's defensive shot profile, right? Or put another way, are they forcing teams to take twos, non-paint twos or non-rim twos, right? Like that's the goal. So the further away from the rim that they're shooting, that it's not a three-pointer, that's what's going to drive this number in the right direction. And the Timberwolves, as of right now, this is where I want to start. The Timberwolves have the second best location effective field goal percentage next to Golden State, right? So the Wolves have, based on what an opponent's, if they shot league average from the shot profile, what the defense is forcing, they'd be a 53.9% effective field goal percentage. Now, what are they actually this year? 50.2%, right? So they have the league's best defensive effective field goal percentage and the second best location effective field goal percentage. And there's two factors there, right? One is what they can control, the actual personnel and the people that are contesting these shots, and also the frequency in which these shots are contested, right? Because this is just simply based on location, not based on how open the shots are. And then the second thing is obviously a little bit of luck, right? Because if teams are shooting more threes and missing more threes, that's going to help your effective field goal percentage, whereas your location effective field goal percentage goes down. Right. So both those can play into it, but this is just a very face value type metric that just says, hey, are you forcing teams into taking tough twos? And sure enough, if you dig into the profile, it makes sense why they're second here. The Wolves are second in terms of lowest rim attempt percentage. League average is just under 33% of shot attempts coming at the rim for an opponent. The Wolves are at 28.7%. That is more than 4 points better than league average. That's significant. Now, if you look at 3 points, so that's second in the league at the rim. You look at 3-point attempts, they're 7th overall in terms of shot frequency. They're allowing just over 34% of opponent shots to come from 3-point range, which is, league average is about 36%. So a couple points less than league average. Corner threes, though, this has actually gone a little bit in the wrong direction. They're 9th and they're 11th on non-corner threes. So in general, the Wolves are driving opponents away from corner 3-point shots. They're top 10 in that metric, and overall 7th in deterring 3-point attempts. So where's everything else? It's in the mid-range. The Wolves allow the most mid-range attempts of any team in the league, the second most long mid-range attempts, and the third most short mid-range attempts. So obviously you combine those two and you get the 30 or first, I guess, in terms of mid-range attempts. League average defenses allow 31% of shot attempts to come from the mid-range. The Wolves are over 37%. More than a third, well over a third of opponent shot attempts are coming as mid-range attempts, not at the rim and not outside the arc. That is a number one defense shot profile. That is how you do it. Probably in any era, frankly, although obviously the frequency of those mid-range shots is going to be way higher the further back you go, right? But especially today's NBA, forcing those mid-range shots is really, really, it's the name of the game. That's exactly what the Wolves are trying to do. And it's why when they do struggle and they I think all the Wolves losses except for one have been double-digit losses this year. And they can struggle against these fast guards that get off mid-range jumpers that can also shoot the three if they try and switch up their pick and roll coverage, right? Because the Wolves like to play drop, but if you play drop against, insert, and they haven't faced Kyrie yet this year, but like Kyrie Irving or Tyrese Maxey, De'Aaron Fox, these guys that are CJ McCollum, that are very comfortable shooting mid-range jumpers that are very efficient in that range. And also like, say, Joel Embiid, right? If you want to look at a big that excels from the mid-range, that's what killed, the mid-range jumpers and the free throw attempts are what killed the Wolves last week against the Sixers. Those are the teams that can give the Wolves trouble, and that's when the Wolves can fall apart. If you could be really, which again, it's few and far between. It's happened 6 times this year. The Wolves have actually lost a game out of 28. So I want to be clear. This is very. But if I'm an opposing team, the only way you can beat the Wolves' defense is by being really, really good from the mid range with either your big or your guard, and force the Wolves to change their coverage. Now, if you can't shoot threes, the Wolves will just make you shoot the threes that they want you to take anyway, right? Instead of playing drop and giving up a mid range two, like say, which is how both the Kings and Sixers have gotten the Wolves once each this year. Is if the Wolves say, okay, we can't play drop against these guys, we have to come out to the level, or we have maybe even we're switching. We've seen that a little bit. The Wolves did it against the Mavs and Luka a little bit. Then you find, you could rotate the ball and shoot threes is what you'd have to do offensively. Or if you have a guard, if the Wolves are not playing drop and they're not being aggressive enough, you could just pop and shoot a three from a couple feet outside the arc. But again, there's very few teams that are dynamic enough at the guard position to be able to dominate from the mid-range and dominate from outside the arc. It really is a pick your poison against the Wolves defense. All right, I want to get into take that a step further and look at how teams are shooting the ball against the Wolves, not just the type of shots, but how the percentage of those shots going in. And also mention again those Mike Brown comments after the Wolves game against the Kings on Saturday night. So we'll do all that here next. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the week. And let's go with Isaiah Hartenstein. Well, actually, no. I'll give you 2 today. Let's go with Isaiah Hartenstein. It appears that Mitchell Robinson is out for the season for the Knicks. And Isaiah Hartenstein is the clear ad if he's available for New York. The Wolves have obviously gotten the Knicks already this year, but Hartenstein has been a Wolves killer in the past. Also, I'll mention Taurean Prince is another name Josh Lloyd has for you. The Wolves play the Lakers again this coming Saturday. They just beat them last week. They face them this Saturday again at Target Center. Taurean Prince may not be spectacular, but the former Timberwolf is a big piece of what the Lakers are doing. LA needs his shooting, and he's on a nice run of late, so consider picking up Taurean Prince or Isaiah Hartenstein over on your waiver wire. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows the championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the exact same with your vehicle. My first car was a 95 Mercury Tracer, and I didn't take great care of it. I had just learned how to drive. Didn't really know what I was doing. I wish that I had taken better care of it, and had eBay Motors been around at that time, it would have been a lot easier than just going to, a mechanic that wasn't going to treat the car right or treat me right. If I had eBay Motors, I would have done a much, much better job in high school and college taking care of my vehicle. And eBay Motors is the exact perfect place to help you out. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right. So the Wolves shot profile we've already established is the league's best or second best, I guess, using that metric over at Cleaning the Glass behind Golden State. But the Wolves are top 10 in avoiding corner 3-point attempts against them, top 10 in avoiding 3-point attempts, number 2 in terms of avoiding rim attempts. And that's step 1, right? Like to have the correct shot profile. Related to that, I want to mention Rudy Gobert's rim deterrence. Opponents are shooting, this according to Cleaning the Glass, 6.9% less frequently at the rim with him on the court versus off the court. So we'll round that up to 7%. Opponents are shooting 7% less attempts at the rim with Gobert on the floor versus off the floor. Plus, they're shooting 5.6% less accurately when he's on the floor versus off the floor. So they're not only not shooting well at the rim against Rudy Gobert, they're just not shooting at the rim when he's on the floor. It's the exact perfect convergence of rim deterrence and rim protection from Rudy Gobert. Now, if you look at, said a little bit of a different way, opponents are shooting way more long mid-range shots against Rudy Gobert. In fact, if you look at, this is interesting, if you look at cleaning the glass and look at, flip it around, look at the teams or the individual players who allow more mid-range shots when they're on the floor, Rudy Gobert is first percentile in the league in terms of opponents shooting more long mid-range shots when he's on the floor. 3.2% more mid-range shot attempts when Gobert is on the floor. The only players ahead of him are Jeremy Grant and Nikola Jokic. Because why? Denver plays a ton of drop coverage. Jokic is really good at it. Now, of course, his rim deterrence isn't nearly what Gobert's is. It's still pretty good. And people forget that about Jokic. And the actual teams actually shoot the ball okay against Jokic at the rim, but they don't actually shoot it against him at the rim very much because they're allowing mid-range jumpers. It's the same design, right? The difference is that if teams decide to go into the paint, or if they get penetration off a different action and it's not off the initial pick and roll in the middle of the floor, then Gobert's going to swat a shot. Jokic isn't necessarily going to do that. But because the Nuggets are so good in their drop coverage, that's why their defense is decent. And, Jokic's rim deterrence is still really good. Gobert, in terms of all mid-range shots, same deal. He's top 3. In fact, he's just a hair behind Embiid in terms of total mid-range shots, the frequency going up when they're on the floor. So teams are shooting almost 7% more from the mid-range when Gobert and Embiid are on the floor versus when they're off the floor. That's exactly by design. And again, I go back to the rim deterrence and then the actual lack of success that opponents have when Gobert's on the floor in terms of shooting the ball at the rim. Okay, now addressing the open shots thing, because this is something you've no doubt seen thrown around like, hey, when teams start hitting threes against the Wolves, this defense will regress to the mean a little bit. And it is true. The Wolves have the third best three-point percentage against league-wide on this season. 33.2% is what opponents are shooting from three against them, which is, it's an incredible stat. It's not something that we're necessarily, like, I don't know that number specifically is attainable. The only teams better, the Blazers are 0.2%, 0.2 better. Teams are only shooting 33% from three against Portland, 31.6% against Houston. So the Wolves are third, and then it's a drop off of 1.2 points before you get to number 4 in terms of opponent 3-point percentage. So is that fluky? Well, the short answer is it could be a little bit, but it doesn't have to be, because again, I go back to they're 7th in terms of not allowing corner threes. So it's the type of threes you're allowing. If you're going to allow a three, you want it to be above the break and you want it to be contested as much as possible. And then I go to, let's go to Mike Brown's quote now. I mean, I mentioned this kind of in passing. I summarized it on Monday's show, but after the Timberwolves beat the Kings on Saturday, Kings head coach Mike Brown said after the game, I'm going to read this quote exactly. He said, quote, "You got to give them credit. They're long, they're athletic, and they fly around. You feel a little bit more pressure to get that shot off a little bit quicker, even though they're not going to block most times a perimeter three-point shot, but they make it tough on you. And this is a game that you got to go in with a mental resiliency, because there's no telling what can happen throughout the course of a game with their length and the way they scramble and the protection they have at the rim." So right there, from an opposing head coach who just lost to the Wolves, perimeter jumpers, guys know, hey, they're not going to block this, and there's nobody near me, quote unquote. But first of all, I better rush it so that this length doesn't get out to me. And second of all, I better make it, because I don't know how many open attempts I'm going to get. And sure enough, if you actually look at opponent at the percentage of percentage made on open threes, the Timberwolves are indeed one of the league's best in terms of that overall percentage. So number 1 is Houston, who's number 1 in overall 3-point percentage against. But if you look at what NBA.com or NBA.com/stats classifies as closest defender, 4 to 6 feet, which is what they call open, opponents are only shooting 31.3% against the Wolves. It's tied with Portland for second best, just 0.1% ahead of the Dallas Mavericks for third. And so that tracks, right? But if you also want to look at frequency, the actual frequency that the Wolves are allowing open 3-point shots, that's also pretty low. It's middle of the pack. It's 14% of threes against them are considered open. So that number, right? So that number should be higher, right? Because that percentage should track with the frequency. You'd think, right? It's not, it's not exactly how that works, but you'd think there'd be a little bit of a correlation there. But the Wolves just don't allow that many open 3-point attempts. You look at wide open 3-point attempts. So 6+ feet, no defender within 6+ feet. The Wolves have the 4th best mark in the league in terms of not allowing wide open 3-point attempts. Only 18.2% of three-point attempts against them are wide open. That's fourth best in the league. And yeah, when teams get them, they don't make them. They have the third best mark in terms of percentage on wide open threes, 34.8%. Only Golden State and Houston are better. So, yeah, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg in the sense that the Wolves defense puts so much pressure on you that when you think you're open, you're not really open because of the closing speed and the length of the Wolves defenders. There's also so much more pressure to actually make the shot because you don't know when that next open shot attempt is going to come around. I'm not at all saying that the Wolves are going to hold opponents to 33% from outside the arc all season long, or that opponents are only going to shoot, 35% on wide open threes all season. I'm not saying those numbers will hold. I'm saying that the Wolves ranking league-wide will very likely be in the top 3, top 5 all season long, and that's only combined with the rim deterrence and the effective rim protection of Rudy Gobert, and also the relative lack of fouling, unless you're playing Joel Embiid, that the Wolves have had this year, because that's improved too. They're still top 10 in the league. In fact, I have it right here. They're 8th in defensive free throw rate, so doing a really good job at defending without fouling, at least not allowing a ton of free throw attempts. That's going to be a top, probably number 1 defense, right? Even if they're not number 1, even if they're not suppressing three-point attempts to three-point percentage to 33% all season long, the defensive shot profile, the length, the speed, etc., that this team has is going to lend itself to having a top flight defense all season long, whether or not opponents are making their wide open threes at a 33% clip or a 36% clip. Because again, if only 15% of their shot attempts are wide open from outside the arc, I don't care if that number ends up going up because you're doing a great job in every other area. So 100%, this defense is sustainable. I don't know that all of the underlying data, where there is some flukiness and some luck, I don't know that that's all going to stand up the exact same way all season. But the confluence of all these different factors is going to lead to the Wolves always being a number 1 or a top flight. They may not be number 1 all season, but I think it's likely that they will be. Like, we're now a third of the way through, and this thing looks like it's going to hold up. All right, I want to close today by talking Wolves Thunder as we get ready for the game here tonight, so we'll do that next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Plus, the all-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. Buy tickets in 2 seconds, or in seconds with 2 taps, I should say. And again, it's anything. It's not just sports. It's also, if you're going to go see, a musical act here, if you're off work for the next few days, off school, whatever, go see a comedian at a local theater. They have all that stuff up at Game Time. With zone deals, you can pick the section, and Game Time picks your seats for an average of 18% savings, and their Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's close this thing out by looking at Wolves Thunder. Of course, Minnesota saw the Thunder here just a couple of weeks ago. I don't know, 3 weeks ago now? It was an in-season tournament game. Yeah, it was almost a month ago. And that was the game when Ant initially got hurt. The dunk attempt, he falls on his hip, ends up missing the rest of that game, misses, I think, 2, and then came back for the Spurs game, then left the game early, missed another game. Maybe he only missed 1 the first time around. But anyway, he missed basically three and a couple half games because of the injury. He got hurt in the third quarter of that one. The Wolves were still +6 in the third quarter. Remember, the Wolves were down at halftime by 8 to OKC. This was in Minnesota. Minnesota wins the third quarter by 6. They're trailing by a bucket heading to the fourth. They end up holding on late. And this was kind of when people really started to say, hey, Rudy Gobert might win another Defensive Player of the Year award. And obviously, there's still so much season left to be played now. But that was when people kind of sat up and were like, wait a minute. He just stopped Chet Holmgren like 3 times on a possession. He was stunting on the perimeter, recovering to block shots at the rim. It was just a complete and utter dominant performance from Rudy Gobert in this game. He had 17 points, 16 rebounds, and 4 blocks. And how many shots did guys, including Chet Holmgren, not take because of Gobert's mobility? Chet had 16 points, but it took him 20 shots to get it. He was 6 of 20 shooting overall, 3 of 8 outside the arc. which, by the way, meant that he shot 3 of 12 on 2-point attempts in this game. Chet Holmgren shot 3 of 12 on 2-point attempts, and that is Rudy Gobert. That's his influence. Now, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did what he does. He was much, much better in this game against his cousin, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, than he was in the playoffs. Remember, or in the play-in game, I should say. Alexander-Walker shut him down, really, last year in the play-in. In this game, Shai had 32 on 22 shots. He only turned it over 3 times, was really good. Alexander-Walker was 1 of 7 shooting for this game and not as effective defensively. On the Wolves side of things, it was all about Gobert. The Wolves didn't have a very good shooting night, at least inside the arc. Conley was 3 of 14 overall shooting. Alexander Walker was 1 of 7. So, I mean, that's the Wolves starting backcourt. Edwards getting hurt in the third quarter. And then Alexander Walker and Conley combined to shoot 4 of 21 from total from the field, 4 of 21. Naz was huge off the bench in this game, 15 and 7. The Wolves did shoot 42% from 3, and they had 32 free throw attempts in this game. A lot of that was Cat. Cat had 13 points, but 8 of them came at the line. He had 6 turnovers. It was a bit of an uneven performance, but this was like professional Mike Conley and dominant Rudy Gobert down the stretch, and just enough from Naz and some, Troy Brown Jr. Oh yeah, this was a 17-point Troy Brown Jr. explosion late in the game after Ant got hurt. So this was just a well-rounded team win. And now this time it's going to be in Oklahoma City, and the Wolves have a couple days rest, as does OKC. And you could bet that OKC, especially at home, is going to want to try and maintain this, avoid falling behind 2-0 in a potential tiebreaker against the Wolves, because OKC's been phenomenal still, right? Like OKC's won, let's see, they're 18 and 9. They just lost to the Lakers the other day. Before that, though, they beat the Clippers, Grizzlies. They beat the Nuggets by a point. They did lose to the Kings, but they also beat the Warriors a couple weeks ago. They beat the Mavs. They beat the Lakers a couple weeks ago. So it's been a pretty consistently strong showing by OKC. The defense has not been as good lately. They've given up a ton of points. And it's really been more just about outscoring teams. And obviously the Wolves' major advantage against the Thunder is their size. Besides Chet Holmgren, like OKC doesn't have anybody that plays rotation minutes with real size. There isn't anybody. There's nobody that's even, I mean, Ousmane Deng is a part-time player off the bench. Guys like Bertans and Pokazevsky aren't even in the rotation and don't play big, even if they were. So that's the area the Wolves have their advantage. OKC's 29th in defensive rebound rate, 28th in offensive rebound rate, and they're tiny. So it's all about Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, I should say Cat's listed as questionable as of right now for the game. He was listed as out early before Saturday's game, so you'd think there's a chance he plays in this one. Remember, he tweaked the knee at the end of the game last Thursday. But whether or not Cat plays, Naz and Gobert have this massive size advantage. Even Kyle Anderson should be able to do what he wants in the paint in this game. It's really all about trying to make Shai Gilgeous-Alexander a little bit less efficient, try and make him shoot threes. He's under 31% from deep. The Thunder don't shoot a ton of threes overall. They're 21st in three-point rate, but they are third percentage-wise because they've got guys that can make them, right? Chet, Lou Dort. These guys are good three-point shooters off the bench. We've got more rotation-type guys that are fringy. I don't know that on like I don't want to say a true playoff team because the Thunder are a playoff team, obviously, but guys like Casey Wallace and Isaiah Joe and players that are maybe a little bit, they've done what they need to do to this point, right? So you want to still try and make those guys beat you, but also make Shai Gilgeous-Alexander into a less effective scorer, less efficient scorer. Try and make him shoot more threes. Don't let him get to the line as much, and use your size to your advantage. Make sure that there should really be no second chance opportunities for this Thunder team. The Wolves need to do a good job shutting off the paint and boxing out, grabbing defensive boards, not allowing those second chance opportunities. But defensively, the Thunder are actually 6th in terms of defensive rating on the season, but lately they've given up a ton of points. They've been in more of these track meets. Like the only team they've held under 100 points here recently was Memphis. And that was, I think, right before Ja came back, if I'm not mistaken. Otherwise, they're giving up 110 plus over the past couple of weeks. So that defensive rating for them has slipped backwards. They've been top 3 for much of the season. It's 6th now. Again, offensively, it's more about when they get open threes, they make them. And then they're trying to get to the free throw line. They're 7th in free throw rate offensively, or actually 13th in free throw rate. They're 7th in terms of free throw attempts to field goal attempts. So however you want to look at that, they're in the top tier of the league in terms of getting to the line. And so much of that is SGA. He's the biggest one. And then second in terms of free throw attempts per game is, of course, Chet Holmgren. So Minnesota, this is going to be a tough game for the Wolves. They do match up well against the Thunder because they should be able to just dwarf them with their size. SGA is the only high volume perimeter guy you really have to worry about. I know Jalen Williams is averaging 17 a game. Lu Dort can hurt you if you leave him open, but it's really about making SGA as inefficient as possible and using your size to beat them on the glass. And the Wolves, this is a good matchup for Minnesota. I think when it's all said and done, the Wolves probably win 3 out of 4 against OKC in the regular season. Hopefully this is a W. If Towns doesn't play, I could see them losing this game just because the Thunder are good. But as far as matchups go, it's not a bad matchup for the Timberwolves. I should mention the FanDuel line for this game, and I'm sure it's complicated a bit by, Cat's status. The Wolves are actually +2 on the road at OKC. So the Thunder are favored by a couple of points in this one. If Cat doesn't play, I wouldn't be surprised to see that move to 3 right before the game starts. But if Cat does play, I don't hate that bet. Like, I think the Wolves are still a better team and matches up well against OKC. Now, the Thunder are good at home and the whole thing. But anyway, all that to say, I love the matchup. It's fun. I like it for the Wolves. We will have a live postcast following the game over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. And if you can't catch the game live, or if you can't catch the postcast live, the audio will be right here on the Locked On Wolves feed. If you can't watch it, you can listen on SiriusXM. Our friend Alan Horton on the play-by-play, 7 p.m. Central tip tonight on the Hometown broadcast on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves, and you can find that on the SXM app and SiriusXM. We'll have a post-game pod on Wednesday, probably mid-morning. We'll have that up for you. So talking Wolves Thunder, and I'll have that right here on the Locked On Wolves feed as well. All right, that's all we have for you today. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.